All right, hello everybody. It's the Meista for Brews and Tunes. Cheers. Today, I'm really excited. I am chatting with Josh Christian, seminal thrash metal guitarist from the band Toxik, killer band. I've always loved this band. It goes way back, mid 80s. I remember listening to Toxik in high school. There was a pirate radio station here in Utah, and they would play lots of killer thrash from the East Coast. So Toxik definitely was one of those bands. So anyway, thank you, Josh, so much for joining us.
Thanks, Victor. How are you?
Good, good. It's great talking to you. So, man, there's so many questions I want to ask you. I don't even know where to start. Well, I think that probably the big thing is you've got some exciting news coming up here, if I'm not mistaken, right? There's Toxik. There's some stuff going on with Toxik, I think, right now.
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot going on, but the main thing being was announced last week that we've signed a deal with Massacre for 3 years and 3 albums, which is a lot of opportunity to write music, and it's official. It took a little while to get it inked. The pandemic made it a little bit, I think, more difficult to kind of come to terms. It took longer than it maybe would have if we weren't where we are now, but it came together nonetheless, and it's a nice, fair deal for the band, and we're really excited to have it. It's a great partnership. Massacre is a very cool label. They believe in it. They have a fandom for us. They really believe in Toxik, so I think it's a good partnership. We're gonna rock.
That's fantastic. That's really good news. That's exciting to hear. And you said a 3-album deal. Is that what you said?
Yeah, 3 years, 3 records is kind of how it's laid out. Whether or not we can meet that schedule or not, I don't know. We'll see. That's a lot of writing. You know, Toxik stuff tends to be pretty busy, and that takes a lot of work and to get it together, but we'll give it a shot.
Nice. Now, so the first album, is that already in the works? Do you have something already? Nice.
Yeah, it's really, we've been using, we have a working title, Dis Morta, which is sort of street Latin for this death. And we are pretty far along with that record. We have it's been written for a while, but we have all of the rhythm guitars are done. Essentially, at least my portion of it. About 7 out of 11 tunes done vocally. 4 are done on bass. Drums are going to get done, before the end of the month. So we're right in it right now. It's happening. So.
Very cool. That's really exciting news. Yeah. Is there a date you're shooting for in terms of finishing and then getting it released, or?
I'm scared scared's the wrong word, but I hate to tie myself to a date because I'm notoriously bad with that. But as a band, we're getting better, and I have help from 4 other people. So I think we're going to be on time, and we're looking at this point July 1st to have it wrapped up, and then we'll hand it to the label, and the schedule as far as the release goes is sort of up to them, but we're going to have our portion of it done by July.
Nice. Very cool. That's super exciting news. I can't wait. So at least towards the end of the year, hopefully we will be seeing a Toxik album, a brand new Toxik album, which is very, very exciting. Wow, that's great. That's great news. Well, why don't we go back in time a little?
This is the first place I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. This is actually the first time I've gotten to say it too. I mean, we did an announcement on socials, but you would be the first person, the first place where we've actually said it publicly. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So everybody, you heard it here first. Well, sort of. Well, great. That's awesome. Well, let's kind of go back in time a little bit and talk about kind of the early days of Toxik and how the band formed, how you kind of started everything. And I'll even go up there's the first album, killer album, the World Circus. It's such a great album. But yeah, so I mean, we're talking like mid 80s, right? When the band originally formed, and how did that all come together?
Toxik was formed from an earlier iteration called Tokyo. The nucleus of Tokyo was a bass player named Lee Irwin Merrill, who was the original bass player in Toxik. He's the guy who plays on the first demo, on the Wasteland demo that gets us signed. Really kind of my writing partner for a long time, was the guy that really introduced me to writing. It was our brainchild together. Tokyo was cool, but it was like a working, functioning cover band at the time. And we were stuck playing other people's music, and we were both writers. We were writing a lot of stuff. I had met Lee a few years earlier, and immediately we started to write stuff. The guy came around for me personally, was just at the right time. I was ready to go into the idea, go with the idea of playing other people's music and learning as I went and so forth. And I run into this guy when I'm 14, 15 years old. And he's like, no, man, write your own shit. Don't play other people's music, write your own stuff. So I got introduced to that relatively early. Later on in the 80s, that becomes much more sort of prevalent. Like bands got younger and younger and younger. But at that point, we're talking literally like late 70s, 1980 when he's saying this to me. So it was still pretty unique. Bands like at the time Def Leppard were kids. So anyway, that's kind of where it really started. That's how it got going. And once we decided that we wanted to really do that, it was very quick. Within a year and a half of doing the demo, writing and doing the demo, we were signed and we were up and running with Roadrunner. I mean, it just happened super fast once we decided we would do that. Unfortunately, I will say that Lee, along the way, between the demo and the recording of World Circus, left the band. And it was kind of a drag at the time, but it opened up, one door closes, another door opens. And that's how Brian came into the band, and he was the bass player for the first two records, and a great guy, and really a big part of the band of what became Toxik after that. We've always been growing. We're still growing now. It seems to be like that's kind of our thing. We are not a sit still kind of niche band. We're a niche band, but our niche is to keep moving. So we're and it still kind of has that. It's still growing.
Nice, very cool,
yeah.
Very cool. So you mentioned those early days. How did you originally get involved in music? How did you start playing guitar? What was the inspiration there?
My mom and dad were restaurant and artist people from Greenwich Village. I actually was born at St. Vincent's in the West Village, and grew up consequently in that environment. So I was surrounded by the arts. I was surrounded by entertainers and poets, and it was that trip in the late 60s and 70s. My parents were part of that. So I'm second generation hippie kid. And music was just natural. I mean, my dad would open up his bar on Saturday morning, and it had been a party the night before. And I was, 8 years old. And I'd go in and the drums were still there. The piano was still there. The bass was still there. So I could pick up and play any instrument I wanted while he cleaned the bar all day. And I did. And I would sit around and just jam all day. And little by little, his friends kind of got hip to me doing that and brought me along. So that by the time I'm 12, 13 years old, I'm actually playing drums in my dad's cover band, my dad's friend's cover band.
Oh, wow.
So like music has always been a part of what I do. It's just been around me my whole life.
That's really cool. That's really exciting. Wow, that's amazing. And what was for those of us that weren't there, what was New York like at that time with the transition into the kind of the metal scene of the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s?
That's a great question. It was interesting, and I was old enough to be aware of it. My dad had a bar right at the corner of 3rd and Sullivan called Googie's, and next to it was a record store called Second Coming Records. And whatever year Unleashed in the East came out in, I want to say it was 78, that album was in the window in the store next to my dad's bar. And I was like, Pop, you got to buy me this record. And my dad looked at it, and my dad, being like a 1950s guy, was immediately homophobic and saw Rob and was like, no way, son. He was like, fuck that, But I was like, no, Dad, it's metal. You don't get it. And I could feel it coming. And so that was that time, and metal was risky at that point for a lot of people. Again, being a West Village kid, I had a punk influence. Street music of the 70s in New York City was punk. Right. My parents and their friends had turned into jazzers by that point, and the folk thing had gone away, and it was now into that. So I was the next generation, and we embraced metal, which was a combination of all that had gone on before. Metal really evolved from classic rock and punk, especially what we did. Toxik, I was born to do thrash. Thrash is a combination of power metal and punk. That's right. What thrash is. And played at 45 RPM speed. So it's, you know, that was how that happened. So that period of time, anyway, to your question, I'm sorry, New York at that time, New York's always had a funny scene. It's kind of, there's so much to do in New York that it's pockets. And it was always a niche. You had the CBGB's thing, you know, or you had the Cat Club thing. It depended on the era where you were at, but there's always a scene, always. And as a kid, I just liked metal, man. Kiss was my band. Van Halen had popped. I got turned on to Priest. Scorpions came along. I met Lee, my writing partner there. He turned me on to Scorpions right as Virgin Killers had come out, like, you know, again, 79. I'm just a little kid. It was an awesome time to be into music, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess I can give you my experience of New York at that time. It was fucking awesome.
Nice. That's great. And the cool thing too was, I mean, you look at, you know, especially the thrash metal scene of the 80s of New York, you know, or at least East Coast New York area, you know, with, you know, there's you guys, there's Anthrax, there's Whiplash, you know, DRI, there's Overkill. And I mean, were you all kind of playing together? Did you know each other? Was there, you know, as you said, there was kind of this niche scene, and kind of before it really exploded and got really big, you know, and people started making money and touring the world. But you know, kind of that club scene of New York with the thrash bands, was there kind of a, I don't know what, for lack of a better term, was there kind of a brotherhood of thrash metal bands at that time?
It's a great word. I guess that, yeah, kind of, because we all played at the same venues. So, you know, if you were playing at L'Amour's the week before and the week after, you were going to be there seeing Overkill and watching Anthrax, or seeing, you know, whatever the local thrash scene was. There was a couple of those places. There was a place in Yonkers, New York, called the Rising Sun, which was very famous at the time because the guy wouldn't put the heat on, and we're in New York. So, you know, in like December, January, it'd be 30 degrees in that place, and he'd basically depend on body heat. Like, you needed to bring people into your show just to keep the place warm, you know?
Wow.
So, you know, and that was part of the scene. So the brotherhood was that, again, that niche kind of like real visceral, we were in it. The New York, I feel like the difference between the New York and the California scene was that New York's got that grittiness. It's just there. It's prevalent. And whereas the New York guys are like, yo, bro, what's going on? New Yorkers are like, fuck you. So,
Right.
you know, our thrash was pretty intense, right? Early on, like that stuff was intense, and our shows were intense too. Yeah, it was, there, I guess there was a brotherhood, and it was a scene, and it was very different, because when I got out to the West Coast, I was like, oh, this is cool. You know, this is
Right.
totally different than what we were doing back home. Wow, you know?
I mean, and obviously, you know, I mean, with thrash metal, you know, globally, it's, I mean, it's always kind of come out of angst, you know, anger, reaction. It's very reactionary to what was going on at that time, especially, and still today, I think. But yeah, and I've never really been able to, maybe you can verbalize this better than I can. I've never really been able to put a finger on, even though there's a very different vibe between West Coast and East Coast thrash of the 80s, I still can't really figure out what it is, but it's definitely there. There's something different. And not that one is better than the other, you know,
Oh, no,
but
exactly.
But there's just a difference. And maybe it's just that New York vibe. I don't know.
No, I agree with you. And like I kind of was just touching on that. I think it really comes down to that polarity difference between East and West coasts, which may not be as intense as it once was. I feel like the internet has made the world smaller in general, and we don't have the polarity that we once had, but there was a West Coast, East Coast thing going on for a long, long time in a lot of different kinds of music. It wasn't just metal. It wasn't just thrash. That shit went on between a lot of different, you know, so that took on a lot of different parties. But the LA, or not LA, but San Francisco down to LA, because there was a migration there, right? Metallica went up, you know, there was a crosshatch of people in the California scene that were doing heavier music up and down the coast. And I remember going out, I want to say it was probably, it was before Toxik had gotten signed, or we had just got signed, maybe 85, 86, so mid 80s, right in the middle. And I remember going out and like hanging out with a couple, my bass player Brian and I had met a couple of girls at a show at Madison Square Garden, and we went out to hang out with them in Frisco. And that was like right in the heyday of that. So, you know, we're out hanging out, we're checking it out. And again, the Bay Area scene was much more fraternal, was much more of a party, was much more of like, hey, let's, you know, like they were in support of each other. Whereas I feel like the New York bands maybe were more competing with each other.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I remember reading an article or an interview many years ago with, and I don't even remember who, it was somebody in Nuclear Assault. And he was, I might have been the singer, I can't remember, but yeah, he was kind of talking shit about a lot of bands that were part of the scene. And just, it was kind of, I mean, yeah, I remember him specifically like calling out Slayer and like, fuck those guys, like we'll kick their asses, you know, kind of a thing, you know. And I think he was kind of joking around, but it was funny, just, yeah, very competitive. Yeah, he had a very competitive edge to him, which, yeah, it's fun. It was cool. It was cool. So World Circus came out in '87, and then 2 years later, you guys did Think This, another killer album. And I won't say you necessarily changed directions, but you definitely, like as you said earlier in the interview, you grew as a band. I mean, that album has a more, dare I say, a more progressive, especially the guitar work. I think your guitar work is much more progressive going forward, and it's also, and maybe it's because you got a different singer, but it's also maybe a little more melodic than the first album. It seemed like you were kind of exploring some different elements there. Was that kind of just more organic? Was it, did you go out, like decide we're going to do a different album, or, you know, a totally different sound, or, you know, was it kind of?
You know, I've experienced this recently too. In 2017, I had a similar experience. When we went out and toured World Circus and started gigging World Circus, suddenly we were playing with a much higher caliber band. Whereas before we might be doing local shows with local bands, and every once in a while we play with a bigger band ourselves. For the most part, we were kind of just a local band. So once we're supporting World Circus, we're introduced to a much higher caliber of musician. I personally, because I'm kind of the generator for Toxik, I've always been the songwriter. It's kind of starts, that's sort of, but I'm very inclusive. I really like having a band. I like working with people, and I like them to use their voices on my material. Like, I like to write songs and see what other people do with my stuff. Okay. You know, here's my part, here's what I think it should be. Please play it as close to that as you can, because it really kind of sticks to the form of what the song is, but now do your own thing. And that's always been the way I've approached it. So I feel like there was a pretty large transition in Think This, because the guys had a lot more influence on what we were doing. Yes, my guitar playing definitely grew. I was practicing a lot more. I was taking it much more seriously. I was listening to a lot more people. And again, I forget where we were, but we had a gig somewhere and we were playing with Majesty, which later on became Dream Theater, of course. And John Petrucci, young John Petrucci, man, and I sitting in the back room and just fucking ripping, you know what I mean? Like, at that point, I was really just sort of, you know, germinating, and I get exposed to guys like that. Dimebag from Pantera, we're gigging with Pantera, and he and I are playing. I have a story about him and I jamming on Kiss songs together, you know. And no matter what a lot of people talk shit about Pantera. I'm always amazed at like the level of hostility that Pantera can generate from true metal fans. But right, like at that point, those guys especially, they were actually touring power metal. So it was before Cowboys, and they were really kind of, I feel, at a peak at that point, and they were so good, man. And we were influenced, man. You play with people at that level, and it's just like, holy shit, wow. I mean, those guys had a sound together. We didn't have that sound together. We weren't at the kick drum triggers yet. We didn't have a front of house sound guy traveling with us. I mean, this is the stuff that makes a band sound really great in a club environment. Well, we were raw, man. We were almost a punk band. Toxik is a very sort of almost hardcore kind of crossover band early on. So Think This is a genesis from all of that. It was like, wow, look what we can do. And then we kind of just took it and ran with it.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, that's a great album too. I love that album. That's fantastic. And the cool thing too, what I loved about, well, both, well, all of your stuff, but I mean, those first two albums, what was so exciting about them, I mean, you got Ed Repka doing the artwork, and it was very, and now this is kind of like a dirty word almost, but or a dirty concept. But back then, like, the thrash metal scene was very politically charged, which was cool. It was very reactionary to Reaganomics and what was happening in America at the time, and the arms race. And now it's weird. Maybe it's just because, I don't know, the internet world that we live in, and I don't want to get too political, but it's everybody is so triggered. Like, it seems like now, whereas then it was like,
what do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean? I am not triggered. What do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. But then it was like, yeah, I mean, all the punk and specifically punk, and definitely thrash metal was very politically charged music. And now if you do anything politically charged, people freak out. And it's like, well, did you listen to us back then? Like, do you know what we were singing about back then? It's interesting those dynamics, I guess. And some of it's just, as people get older, they get more conservative, and which is fine. I'm not trying to attack anybody, but it's just interesting that kind of dichotomy, I guess. So fast forward from Think This, Toxik, you guys were still, you still played live, but nothing was put out for quite a long time, until was it probably 2017-ish, I guess, when you put out an EP?
Yeah, we took a really long break. Like the kind of break where you don't think you're going to get back together break. And not just me, everybody, we kind of went on with our lives. And so the way we reformed was pretty interesting. We had a friend of Brian, the bass player, was a producer/director for a production crew that worked directly for the Discovery Channel and the Discovery Channels. And he would regularly go out and make documentaries for his networks. And he and Brian had a conversation, apparently, and he was very interested in the Toxik story. And this was right at the same time the This Is Anvil movie came out, actually. We were already working on our thing when that came out. We weren't copying that. That was or whatever the Anvil movie was. This Is Toxik was going to be the name of our documentary. But long story short, we reformed around that, got reintroduced to one another, and realized we were still friends and that we still had music in us. And again, we were just at that point where it kind of seemed like a good time to do it. And so we got together and we jammed, and that was filmed, and you can find that on YouTube now if you go looking. And it was cool. It was just, again, great to get back together with my friends. Tad, the original drummer, did not show up for that rehearsal. Instead, Lou Calderola, who played drums with Brian and I, the post band for Toxik, the band that came right after Toxik, was a band called Autumn, which was a really sort of just straight up prog metal band. We were going to just be a proggy band. That was our thing. And it just never fully formed, but Lou's a great drummer. So Lou came in for the reformation and did a great job. He was really good. And we recorded half a dozen songs. We immediately began songwriting, but it fizzled. Making a documentary is not enough of a reason to start the band over, is what it came down to. I mean, it was fun. And it was a great opportunity, and it's flattering and whatever, but the reality is it's not the impetus for creating music. So what ends up happening, for us anyway, is we take a break. There's a shift again. Brian ends up not making it for the next go round. That was 2007. We get back together again 5 years later, 2012. That's a happenstance once again. I'm starting to build guitars. And tell me if I'm going too far ahead. Let me know if I'm jumping.
No, this is interesting.
Okay, so because this is how we got restarted, because we had two jumps. We had two times. The first one was a jump start. The second time it actually took. I was building guitars, and I was going to use the Toxik name to promote my guitars. The brand name was Nex, N-E-X-X, and I was going to use the X from the Toxik in the logo of the guitars. And I told Mike about it. I said to Mike, hey, I'm thinking about, maybe doing some new Toxik. just to promote the guitars. Maybe we could record a couple of songs. And Mike jumped on Facebook and said, Toxik is back.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, like, it was totally cool. Like, I don't think he really meant anything by it. And the fucking reaction was ridiculous. Like, it had been in 2007 too. Like, not ridiculous. I don't ever want to be pretentious that way. People who like Toxik love Toxik, but we're not a big band. We never really got a big push from our label. We haven't been out there that much. We're still growing. We actually are in a unique position at our ripe old age to still be in a growing place, which is pretty cool for me. Anyway, we can talk about that later more if you want to, because again, that's not a negative for me. I think a lot of people would be more bitter if they were me in the position that I'm in with Toxik, but I'm not. I'm really happy that we can keep going. So anyway, the band shifted around a little bit. Next thing you know, we're working again. And this time it took, like I said, Jason Bittner from Shadows Fall came along to play drums this time. I ended up hooking up with a local guy up here in the Syracuse area, Bill Bodley, who is now the bass player in Flotsam and Jetsam. Of course, Jason went on to Overkill after Toxik. So, I mean, like, there was just like a lot, once again, kind of like a little cyclone happening of toxicity, if you will. And when it was all done, it came back around. And again, I'll wait for the next question, because I could tell you then how the new lineup was formed and how happy I am.
That was actually my next question was, and I'm having to look down here because I've got all the names, but I don't have them memorized. So yeah, you got Jim on drums, Jim DeMaria, Shane Bolus on bass, and Ron Iglesias on, he's a singer and plays some guitar as well, right?
Yes.
And then Eric Van Druten on guitar as well.
Druten, yes, Eric Van Druten. He's our Dutch guitar player. Yes.
Very cool. And how did this band, this new version of Toxik form? How did this come together?
At the risk of being very Josh, I will say to you, my awesome fucking killer band,
Nice.
who I really love. Okay, so we're scheduled to go and play in Latin America, our first trip to Latin America, and things are a little funky between me and Jason Bittner and Bill, and I don't know, it just, the run that we had done in Europe with Jason didn't go that well. Personality wise, it was a little tough at times. To be fair too, just to touch on that, because I don't want any negative BS out there. I don't want anybody to think I'm talking shit. I'm not. We were just getting back to it, and Jason's a real professional. Jason Bittner's an amazing drummer. He's a great player. And I'm sure we were tedious as fuck for him, because Mike and I were just coming back, and I mean, basically, we're dad. We're back. Our kids are grown. We're back, and Jay's like hardcore, been at Ozfest the week before, you know what I mean? And he's stuck dealing with Uncle Bob, and I felt bad for him. So to be fair, if there was a rub in either direction, it's probably my fault for, bringing it out too soon, but it is what it is. Anyway, I'll say that. But that paved the way for a new drummer, and a good friend of the band, Nick Mimikos, actually mentioned James DeMaria to me. He said, this guy, I know he's, he played with Whiplash and played with, this, I forget the name of his other band. He was in Marauder, I think. He played with like other bands. He was known, and he was sitting in on bigger gigs. He was sitting in on these, like, again, with Whiplash, on the Whiplash gig. So, Whiplash and Toxik share some territory, especially on World Circus. World Circus is a true thrash record. So when I heard that, I was like, okay, because we'd had a few different people we talked to for drums, but it was really like hard to find somebody that fit the band. Like, it was important that they kind of be a certain kind of person. I didn't want to have happen what had just happened. I really wanted to pick people that could work. You get to a point. I saw a great interview one time with Chuck from Death, where I forget who the interviewer was, but he's like sitting on a bed somewhere in a hotel, and like the guy asked him, how come so many people come and go, is like the paraphrase. Right. And Chuck is like, it's hard to find people that share your vision. It's extra hard to find people that share your vision and aren't making any money for sharing your vision. Like, it's really tough to find somebody to follow you on these journeys, especially initially, So, and that's true. That's really true. Finding the right people who get the whole thing is so tough. So anyway, James was just good fortune through Nick Mimikos. We had a conversation. We talked about Kiss. He's a huge Kiss fan. He had really good energy. He was down and like just very real. There was no bullshit. Like he was like, okay, I need to do what? I need to do this. Okay, by when? And when he came to rehearse, when he came to his first rehearsal with us, he had his shit down, man. We played Heart Attack and we sounded like we were a band right off the bat. So to James's credit, you know, you get the gig when you show up and you know the material. You really get the gig when you show up and you swing on the material. You know, like he didn't just play it, he came and crushed it. And he's such a good guy on top of it. So enough, I could sit here and fucking dwell on that guy forever, but James was a godsend. And via James, Shane comes along. Shane and James had worked together before. Shane Boulos, the bass player. So James is like, when Bill decided he didn't want to go back out with Toxik again after South America, Shane came and rehearsed, and much like James, man, he just showed up and had it down like he had practiced. In fact, the first time I worked with Jim and Shane together, I sucked. I wasn't taking it seriously. I showed up. I only had the tunes half in the bag. I was just not really there. You know, I wasn't present. And those guys were ripping. They had been working, so they had it down, and they carried me. I sucked, and they were great. And I was like, okay, I suck. I'll be back next week, and I'll have this together. And the next time we rehearsed, I had my shit together. They'll tell you the same story. And we sounded great, and we've been together ever since. And that's now Jim and I are got, you know, 3 continents in 6 years together, and Shane and I and Jim together 4 years coming up on 5. We've been together long enough now that it really makes sense. Eric had been the guitar tech for Toxik. And because he was the guitar tech, he knew our material, he knew us. We had a friendship with him already. He's the professor. He'd already solved problems for us in Madrid that no one else can solve. He's helped me with my pedals and my power problems more times than I can tell you. Like, Eric is the shit, man. So when it came time for us to round it out, get another guitar player, he was kind of the natural choice. It's not like he's new. He's been with us since, I think, the first time I think he traveled with us was 2015. So he's been around a while, and he knows all the material, and he's really like, honestly, at this point, I would say he's one of my best friends. Like, you know, as far as the band goes, like all of the guys in the band have become like best friends, like, which is very, very cool. And then last but not least to talk about would be Ron Iglesias, who comes from the local scene downstate, down in New York. He's, you know, he's been kind of, I sort of saw him coming up. We'd crossed paths a couple different times. I heard his music. He came to my apartment. I was living down in Jersey. He came into my apartment. I forget under what the terms were. Like he was coming maybe for a guitar lesson or just coming to hang out. And we hung out and he had a great vibe. I really liked Ron. He was younger, but he was really cool. And when Mikey decided, Mike Sanders, singer #1 from World Circuits, decided he didn't want to go out because one by one people sort of leave because I'm that annoying, I guess. I had asked Ron then, do you want to come and jump in? And he didn't. That was back 2016, 2017. And Charlie came in for the Breaking Class EP at that point and the subsequent tour. That's how Charlie ended up in Toxik. But I had initially asked Ron. I really thought Ron was the right guy for the gig back then. He was 27, 28 years old. I think he felt a little young, maybe a little inexperienced vocally. He wasn't ready to take on the challenge of that. Because let's face it, the first 2 Toxik singers, you know, burned a pretty heavy trail. You're going to have to sing shit to follow up with those guys, right? So, and I think I don't think he felt confident in his own abilities. But when it came around again, he actually had called me. If that's still available, I'd be interested now. And it's kind of been that way ever since. We're coming up on 3 years with Ron, and he has actually evolved into, again, a full Toxik member. We write together. He's all over this new album. He's playing guitar on the new record. Like, Ron has really become a big part of the creative process in Toxik. He's a writer, so we write together, and that's really cool because I haven't had a writing partner in a long time. So Toxik is really an organic, truly assembled band in the truest sense, where you've got people who are interested in the same objective, interested in the same music. We're not stepping on each other's toes. We're really respectful of one another. And we travel well. Like this group has been on the road and there is no conflict. There is no hassle. We get along really, really well. So It's the best, man. I honestly can't say enough about those guys and just where we're at as a band right now. I've seen, Pearl Bailey said she'd been rich and she'd been poor, and she liked rich a whole lot better. Well, I've seen it shitty and I've seen it nice, and I like nice a whole lot more. Nice is way better, you know?
Cool. Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, I haven't seen Toxik live, you know, this new band live, but I've seen footage, you know, that's been posted on YouTube and things like that. And yeah, you guys are really, really, I mean, it's a tight band. You can tell you enjoy playing with one another. You play off of each other. It's really cool to watch. And you can tell that, yeah, you are not only professional musicians, but you like playing with one another. And that's very evident watching live material with you guys, which is cool.
Thank you. And that's really a nice compliment. Thank you. I'm glad people can see it, because I think it adds to the dimension of the band. If I go see a band and I know they all hate each other, it definitely disrupts the flow. You know, if the band doesn't have camaraderie on stage, you can tell, and that's never good. You know, so I'm glad. That's a super compliment. Sorry to go on with the long answer, but again,
no, that was great. That was very cool. That was cool. Yeah, speaking of live, I mean, I had a great time. So my wife and I went and saw, we did the 70,000 Tons of Metal in 2019. And I know you Toxik played 2020 on the 70,000 Tons of Metal, correct? The cruise. And when I saw the lineup and I wasn't able to go, I'm like, Toxik's going to be out there. Like, damn it. And Possessed. How was that the first time Toxik had played the 70,000 Tons of Metal? How was that experience for you? Because it's so bizarre. It's kind of bizarre, you know. I mean, for people that don't know, it's a cruise ship with 60 bands on it playing, and I think you each play 2 sets. It's crazy. It's insane, but it's really fun.
If you weren't a metalhead before you went on 70 Tons, you will be when you're done. It's the culture. It's like, I feel like it's the best example of what we do as a family. Like, the metal family is really cool. Yeah. And they're really nice to each other, generally speaking, and they have a really good time. And 70 Tons, I think, is the personification of that. I think you really see that in all its glory. You know, the bands and the fans hanging out together, you know, doing their thing, eating breakfast at the pool, chilling, and you know, I'm at the gym working out with Devin Townsend. You know what I mean? And we're talking light politics. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just a cool thing. And again, earlier on we were talking about writing and influence and growth and how things happen. That was a big one for me personally. Being on 70 Tons, seeing behind the scenes, watching other people who have kind of like a big vision for their music and seeing them fulfill it and watching what it takes to do that, seeing that is, again, I feel very fortunate to have that wide-eyed thing that I still have. I know a lot of people in my age would be jaded and cynical by now and just over it. And I don't have 1 ounce of that. Like, I just totally can get off on it. It's amazing. It's super cool. I just feel lucky. I've also had some major health issues, right? So on the other side of having health issues, I think that makes me more appreciative anyway. Like, I'm just happy to be here sometimes anyhow. So all of this is super awesome icing. But 70 Tons was amazing. Got my ass kicked. Incredible performances. Lots of really great players. You know, Atheist knocked my socks off. Havoc was ridiculous. Like, on and on. I can't even, like, it was just like an amazing adventure, musically speaking. It was super cool, man. It was just amazing to be a part of.
Are there any bands that you played with there, or otherwise, or, you know, bands that you saw on the ship, or bands that you've always wanted to play with, or that you're kind of hoping to maybe play with once, you know, now that we're getting kind of out of this pandemic, or at least things are getting a lot better and tours are starting to happen again. And then once, you know, especially with the new album coming out, I would imagine you guys will tour that. Are there bands you'll want to be playing with, or anybody you've kind of talked to about the possibilities of touring with yet?
Sure. Well, yes and yes. And I, you know, always a little reluctant to talk about stuff that hasn't been nailed down. Never good to sort of tip your hat on stuff that doesn't happen, because, you know, for a lot of reasons. But I want to play with everybody that was on 70 Tons again. You know, like it was just so packed full of kick-ass performances. I would love to go out on the road with Exodus. I would love to do that. You know, we've played a few gigs with them. We have a kinship with them now. James plays in Heath with Cragen, and Cragen stands in for Gary when Gary's out with Slayer. So, you know, Cragen is definitely a part of the Exodus family, fully ensconced, and Heathen, and Jim is part of that. Jim actually teched for Exodus one time as well. We played with Exodus way back in Dynamo '88. So it's like we have kind of a long relationship with them. And I could see an Exodus Toxik thing, maybe an Exodus Heathen Toxik thing coming together, possibly. Would be lucky for us. That would be a great exposure for Toxik. We could use that, especially on the new record. Get this band out in front of people. But as far as other bands go, of course, yeah, there are a lot of different groups I could see Toxik going out with. And on the new record, because of the new material, I feel like we could probably play with a broader range of artists as well. I feel like, you know, we're always going to have to play the world circus and think this material, but as we start to break out newer stuff, that kind of defines who you're going to go out with. And I feel like the newer stuff sort of crosses over now. We're starting to get, we're changing, we're growing again. And it's like, some of it's pretty, everybody always says their record's heavy. Oh, it's the heaviest thing you ever heard. You know, it's so cliche to say that, but we are. Like, it's heavier now than it's ever been. It's just got an intensity about it that it hasn't had before. And I think we could get away with playing with heavier bands than we had been able to in the past. Whereas Toxik was, because of our singers specifically, we would have been a lighter band in certain arenas. Now Ron being the way he is on stage and kind of having the voice that he has, and the new material being what it is, I think we could probably get along in a heavier environment. I think Toxik will be able to carry it forward with a heavier bands, which is cool. It broadens who we can play with now, you know?
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, I've always liked shows where there's kind of multiple styles or subgenres of music. I find that more interesting than just, you know, everybody is the same style of music, even though that's cool too. But it's always fun to go to a show and there's like a lot going on musically, you know. It feels kind of like a festival almost, you know, where you have all these different styles happening, you know, which is, I think, pretty cool and pretty fun and eye-opening and a little more interesting sometimes.
I definitely think that is a product of a more modern era. I feel like that ability for different genres within metal, because it's still metal, you know, to be able to like sort of coexist and cohabitate on bills like that through festivals. Mostly, I think people have been sort of just like, you know, programmed at this point really to accept it anyway. But I do think that to your point, I think it is more interesting when you have different bands on stage as opposed to it all being one thing. Having said that, sometimes it's really fun when it is all one thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Like a death metal fest, like where everything is just punishing one after another. It's got its own appeal. There's no getting around it. So, you know, both are good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Are there any, well, speaking of you know, these bands, are there any kind of, maybe, I don't know, say newcomers, but is there anything on your radar right now that you're really interested in? I know a lot of times musicians, especially when working on an album, try not to listen to too much because they don't want some outside influence. But are there any, you know, up and coming bands right now that you're kind of tuned into?
That I like that's coming up, oh God, that would be pertinent to what we're talking about now, or that I'm even just really listening to? Not really. For the reason you just said, like, I've been really into writing for like the last 2 years.
Oh, okay.
I knew this was coming after, once the pandemic kicked off, you know, that really, we were already working. I was already writing towards the album, towards that end, but we had other shows. We were still out doing gigs, and once COVID kicked off, and I'm sure like lots of other people, I just really redirected my energies into writing and composing. And if anything, I'm listening to even older stuff than what I would be normally. Like, I have gone back for my guitar playing specifically because there's a little bit of an expectation for Toxik and me specifically to have a level of playing and performance. So I went back and I listened to the stuff that I was listening to back to Think This days. I went back and I listened to a lot of Cacophony. I've been listening to tons of Jason Becker and Marty Friedman again. I love that stuff. I always did. But I need influence. I need to kind of reconnect with something so that there's a continuity between Think This and This Mort, that they need to be connected, even though they're 25 years, 30 years apart, which is a crazy thing to say. That's just a weird sentence, but it needs to be connected. There needs to be a connection. And so I felt the best way to achieve that would be to listen to the old stuff. And I did. I've been listening. Of course, I listened to some newer things too. Like I listened to a lot of Jeff Loomis as well, because I'm a guitar guy. So there's guitar music. So I listened to a lot of Jeff Loomis. Of course, I listened to shred people like Tony McAlpine and that kind of stuff a lot as well. I always go back and listen to old Holsworth for influence. As far as listening to music in a band form, again, I'm looking to recharge my riffing and so I'm listening to, I'm listening to Exodus. I'm listening to Older Testament. I'm listening to some Watchtower. Watchtower gets quite a bit of play. These are things that, like when I'm out running, I do like a hike run thing that I do kind of every day. It's my music on my workout, so it's like I'm listening to that. And again, it's more than anything, I listen to probably more progressive styled metal. Listening to tons lately. Been listening to tons again of old Megadeth. I've just kind of started listening to Megadeth a lot again. I really love the first 3 records. I think had great writing on them. People want to hear that. Toxik has a nostalgic quality that we can't escape. So rather than try to, beat it back or not, I want to work with it. I want to use it. I want to, you know what I mean? I want to kind of take that vibe and see if I can't continue it. I feel like there's still a field there. There's still something to be heard and something to do. It's not all old. It's not all done. It's really good. And there's a reason that it's stuck around for as long as it has. And I really kind of want to, I don't know if that sounds funny, as I haven't said this, I've never verbalized it, but it's, I want to write new old material in a way. I want it to have that.
Well, there's definitely a very large audience for that. I think it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm on a Facebook group. It's a private thrash metal group. And I think I'm one of the oldest people on that group. And the stuff that's getting posted is Whiplash and Toxik and Exodus, like all these videos and like an album, people showing their albums, and they're like kids in their 20s and they love this stuff. And it's like, that's so cool. Like, that's what I listened to back then. This is great. It's really cool to see, like a 22-year-old posting, World Circus. It's like, that's so cool you discovered that. That's awesome. And it's not, for them, it's not nostalgia. It's like, check out this kick-ass album. This guitar player shreds. You should hear this. So it's cool. It's really cool to, because I always kind of worry, like some of the, because I listen to a lot of old thrash metal, and like, oh, am I just being nostalgic? I'm like, no, this does kick ass. This is a great fucking album. Like, this is amazing stuff, and it stands up. And especially, and I think especially now, not just musically, but even, like thematically, like what we're going through as a country and as a world, like it's maybe even more, more poignant now than it was then in some ways.
I'm sort of shying away from politics normally, like at this point in the conversation, and earlier when you had mentioned the politics, I would have launched into it. I'm really doing my best to not engage with that, because like you said, people are so easily triggered now. And I have very definite beliefs about all of this. And I feel that it's best directed into my music. Yeah. I can say more with my lyrics than I can say in an interview. I can do more with my music than I can, in another forum. It's like, that is our conduit. That is the way we can make our message. And to your point about 22-year-olds holding up 30-year-old thrash albums, I feel like, just like classic rock has had this longevity, thrash has a longevity. Metal from that era has a longevity. Metal in general has a longevity to it. It has become a classic art form. And it is an art form. People will laugh at us, but I feel like Toxik, and I say this to the guys all the time in the band, it's like my favorite thing to say lately, we're almost like an art band. if you listen to bands like Voivod, and Toxik, Death, there is so much new Opeth. I mean, I could just sit here and list band after band after band that is still breaking ground, man. We're still doing, that's what I mean. Like, I like the old music. It's not done. There's still something there to go forward with. There's so much musically that we can do. And we're on our third generation of fans. So now the 22-year-olds' parents might be in their 30s, their late 30s. Their parents may have actually been Toxik fans. I literally can have a third generation fan now. And so to them, we never took a hiatus. We're just Toxik. We've been around forever and we're monolithic. And I'm working with that too. I think of that when I'm writing. It's like, okay, I do want to reach that fan. We've made a connection there. You know, don't be contrived. Here's the trick. Don't be contrived with your music. Write honestly. Right? Steinbeck said, write the truest sentence you know. You want to be a writer? Write the truest sentence you know. That holds true for all art. Okay. How do I get back to that true form? I listen to a lot of old music. I try to like let it process itself organically. And then I hand what I'm feeling off to the other guys and let them do it. Because back in the day, that's how we did music. Now, everything is generated from one guy with his computer. You go learn these tracks, boys, and I'll see you when you come back to record them. And that's how 90% of the music gets written nowadays. Very few people are sharing their material with the band guys and having that feedback, making music as a group. Toxik is a group. So we have that working for us. And Ron, especially, Ron being the youngest guy, but being the most plugged into the thrash thing, is great to bounce with because he's got old school sensibilities.
Nice.
So when we're writing together, even though I'm fucking 20 years older than he is, he's still got, or more, he's still got, Ron was born the year I think this came out. He's got like this thing where he is connected, like you said, to that audience. Although he's now in his 30s himself, he would be the second generation fan. He's got a connection. He's got that thing. He gets it. So, I am very optimistic about the reception for New Toxik. If people are willing to give it a chance and they don't just chalk us up to being an old band, because I know there's some a little bit of a resentment towards the older bands taking up space where new bands should be. There, you get that, especially from old guys my age. I hear that from people my own age group a lot more than you might think, where it's like they're annoyed at us taking up space when we should be making room for the next band. I don't agree. Again, I really feel like, especially for us, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but for Toxik, we are absolutely vital. We're not cruising on anything we've done in the past. It is still 100% effort, authentic. I absolutely care what people think. It's very important to me that we put out something that's real and entertains and makes people think, and what thrash is really supposed to do, man. That was what the basis of our music does, man. It's musically challenging. It makes you think lyrically. And at the end of it, you want to get in a circle and spin around with your friends for whatever reason. You know what I mean? It's simple.
That's awesome. That is great. That is a great answer. Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you.
So I don't want to keep you all night, but I'll ask you one last question, and I should have asked this a long time.
What do you mean? I keep talking. What do you mean?
So as you know, my blog, my page is Brews and Tunes. I pair craft beer. Got my craft beer here. I'm doing a proper revenge.
I wish I had one here. I would imbibe with you. I didn't think ahead. I'm doing, beer should have been drinking. I think I have like one Michelob organic light in the fridge, and I'm not even going to pull that out. So
that's cool. That's cool. So my blog, I pair craft beer with metal, mostly metal music and hard rock. Josh, you're sitting around on a Saturday night. What album do you spin, and what beer do you crack open?
Oh, wow. Okay. I crack open a bag of really good, well-grown pot. Nice. That's the beer I drink. But if I am drinking, it's usually a light beer. Like I just said, it might be a Corona. I'm kind of partial towards light beers because I'm not a big beer drinker. Musically, again, I've been listening to so much old stuff. So I have favorites. I have records that I listen to that I'll put on that are just, you know, um, I still listen to Abigail like pretty
Oh,
regularly.
nice.
Abigail sounds so good. Like when I put it on, like it just makes my room light up. It's got such a great production. I love that album. And I just spun that recently, so that's why I'm saying that. I just listened to Enemies of Reality this last weekend here. Again, getting back into the Loomis stuff, but then listening to the Nevermore tunes, because I think Nevermore was really good. Enemies of Reality is such a sick album. Not one bad track on that record, man. It's
Yeah.
so good. The writing, where else? So, man, he's just singing his ass off in the poetry. Really good stuff. But I like some classics. I do, like, again, I'm an audio guy. I like to listen. I have like a decent sound system, and I like to listen to my music. So there are classic albums that I really enjoy, like classic rock. I heard you say rock. So there's some rock that I like too. Like I'm a big Skinner fan. Like I love Give Me Back My Bullets. I love, that kind of era, like early 70s Muscle Shoals Skinner. I think that stuff sounds great. I really like how it sounds. Alan Holdsworth. I'm a huge Holdsworth fan. I will put on IOU or Metal Fatigue. Those are my two favorite Holdsworth because I just love that era of his music. They sound great again. As far as like really heavy goes, all of like the heavier stuff that I listen to, that I've begun to listen to over the last few years, is more modern. I do like heavier stuff. Like there's some, Garage is like really good. I really like, oh God, I was listening to them nonstop for a while there. Surruption, who are really like super technical, super like just like clinical, techie metal, which most thrash people can't stand because it all sounds the same. They hate it. I like it. It challenges me musically. Surruption, I should say. Right? If I said, I'm really bad with stuff like that. We didn't talk about Heart or any of that. Can we talk about it a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I would like to make that point. I had said earlier on that I was happy to just be here. One of the things that happens when I've had multiple heart attacks. I've had 5 heart attacks.
Holy shit.
And the writer of the song that is best known for Toxik, that is our #1 song played on Spotify, is Heart Attack. Ironically enough, there's a little bit of a weird irony in that for me.
Yeah.
My drummer, back on Mother's Day 2 years ago, 2018, I'd had a heart attack. Jim had a heart attack like less than 36 hours later, 24 hours later. He had a very strange cardiac arrest. His heart just stopped beating. Just very strange. And of course, he made it. Thank God he's okay. He came back, but it was very strange. It was a very weird thing that happened to him. And he talks about it quite a bit. It really was a radical shift for him too. Ralph Santola. We didn't talk about Ralph. Ralph had played with Toxik briefly. Ralph was going to be in Toxik in the formation period back around 2015. And he had a heart attack. Ralph had a heart attack and ultimately passed away. So there was like this heart attack thing going around right at the same time for Toxik back in 2018. It damaged my memory, is the point I'm making. I have a bit of a problem from time to time with certain memory things. Now, you don't have to include this in the video, but when I'm trying to recall things, I have a short-term memory issue. I can remember long-term things pretty well. I remember my music, no problem. I can remember my kids' names, thank God. Yeah. But there's like little shit that I cannot remember in a moment. And it's like, it can be particularly challenging for me in a time like this, and this kind of thing. Right. And I'm debating on whether or not to tell someone like yourself, do I say this before I go on? You know what I mean? Do I tell you this? Is this something I should let people know? Because again, I'm just kind of getting back to it. I'm going to be doing a lot more of this. And I don't want to come across forgetful, but I also don't want to hide from something that I am. I do feel like it's a part of what I do now, and it's inspiring me in a lot of ways, because having those little memory gaps allow me to kind of, I kind of have an optimistic side to me. It's a negative, it sucks, but at the same time, it keeps me really fresh on stuff because I'm constantly having to like recall things, and there's a certain amount of freshness that I can have because I'm not stuck dealing with the weight of all that memory. You don't think about it, but you're carrying around a loaded up hard drive. If your hard drive just can't hold all of that, it frees up hard drive for other things. And I find myself way off in other kinds of thought now. I write like stories. I'm writing now.
Oh, cool.
I'm doing all kinds of different sorts of music. I'm not just doing the Toxik metal. I actually have a solo record going. I have other things, and I'm finding myself doing electronic music and doing like I'm just exploding creatively at the same time this other thing is happening. So almost in a savant way, as I lose one thing, I pick up another. And that's been a very interesting part of the whole process. And that's it. I didn't know if that would be pertinent or not, but I thought I would let you know, because again, I struggle to remember Martin Furia. I couldn't think of Martin's name. And it's like, I don't want to offend people because no one wants to hear that you had a memory gap. People don't, you know what I mean? Like, that's like one of those things like, what do you mean? You know, we just traveled around Europe together for, you know, like, this is your good friends, you know.
Right.
But I have that memory glitch. And I bet actually they would understand because they are my friends. They probably wouldn't care, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from. So Josh, thank you so much for chatting with me today. This has been awesome. This is great. I'm really, really excited to hear about a new Toxik album. And well, hopefully, you know, 3 Toxik albums coming up, it sounds like soon, in the not too distant future, but one coming definitely soon. I think a lot of fans are going to be really excited to hear that coming out, you know, and we'll be keeping an eye out for the new album. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Victor. It's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.